Morning, everyone. My name is Melody Barnes, and I am chair of the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, and really thrilled to see all of you here with us this morning, and in particular to be here with this fantastic panel. And I'm going to introduce them all in just one moment, and we'll have time for a conversation here and then leave plenty of time for you all to engage and to ask them questions as well. But I just want to start out by putting this issue into context. So we're talking game on, the race for tomorrow's talent today. And I know an issue that confronts CEOs, people sitting at their kitchen tables, economists and others, is whether or not America will be competitive as we go into the 21st century. But here's the question for all of us and across all sectors. Are we doing everything that we can to ensure that American businesses have the talent that they need to be competitive, since we know that the private sector is such a critical element in driving our economic engine? I can tell you that when I used to serve at the White House and I would meet with CEOs, they would tell me my shareholders would be stunned if they knew exactly how much time I spent thinking about education and thinking about workforce training. And now on the other side of that experience, as I sit in corporate boardrooms, as I sit on the board of a large nonprofit that focuses on these issues, we can see the relentless focus on finding and developing and retaining talent in the private sector. But along the way, from here to there, the road to developing that kind of training and to making sure that American workers are prepared for jobs in the 21st century, the road is littered with all kinds of complexities. You've got globalization, a huge opportunity, but at the same time, lots and lots of challenges, particularly for workers. And how are they going to be prepared, and how are they going to compete with workers in other parts of the world? We also look at the rapid rise of technology. Again, a huge opportunity, but what kind of technology will displace workers, and how do we train workers so that they're prepared to be facile with the technology that's available and that will make the economic engine work faster and better and ensure that we're delivering more services and more products? For policymakers, what kinds of questions do they have to confront as they're thinking about ways to incent and to support training and education, and to ensure that we're lowering the hurdles as those in the private sector are thinking about ways that they can train workers and engage with workers? And then we look at all of the disruption and opportunity that's existing when we think about the kinds of institutions and organizations that are training workers, and they are many. So those are the kinds of questions and many more that we know are in front of us, but the bottom line is that we know that we have to get this right. So this panel is going to tell us exactly how we're going to do that, no pressure. But I'm going to introduce them now because I think we've got a really wonderful range of backgrounds and experiences that will help us confront some of those questions and answer some of the questions that you all have. I'll start out by saying, in case you thought, where is Governor Hickenlooper? You're not imagining anything. The governor had to go back to Denver, so he isn't with us. But he asked someone, Noel Ginsburg, who I've heard so much about just last night. In fact, I heard the governor speak at Zoe and Bill Buttinger's house, and he talked about Noel's work with him and helping him in the state of Colorado as he thinks about issues of workforce training and education. And Noel is the CEO of Intertech Plastics. He also is the chair of the Denver Public Schools College and Career Pathways Council, and he was appointed by the governor to lead the Business Experiential Learning Commission. So he comes with lots and lots of experience, and I know from our conversation we'll add a rich source of information to this panel. Next to him is John Fallon, who is the CEO of Pearson Education. And not only does John bring the perspective of leading the world's largest education company to this conversation, but I think the other thing that is critical is that he also has to think about these issues because of the size of his workforce. We have 40,000 workers in 70 different countries around the world. So he brings both sides of this issue to the table. And then finally, my friend, who's the founder and the CEO of Europe, which is a huge nonprofit that focuses on workforce development and training for Opportunity Youth. It's a $90 million nonprofit, and in full disclosure, I sit on the Year Up board, but I know that Gerald is someone who, not only as a business person, but also as the founder of this organization, thinks about these issues literally every single day. So please help me welcome the members of the panel. I want to start the conversation, and Noel, I'm just going to toss this question out to you, because of the work that you do with the public schools, because of the commission you serve on, but also because you have a 200-person workforce with your own company, and ask you what kinds of challenges American businesses are facing when they think about issues of workforce training in terms of how to identify and how to source the talent that they need.
Well, I think some of those challenges are different based on the industry that you're in. As a manufacturer for the last 36 years, our challenge has been the technical schools, the apprenticeships that existed in this country really began to melt away when we thought as a country that service industry was going to drive us forward. So there's a 20-year gap in the skills that we need for many of the technical roles that we have within our company. That being said, I believe other industries are feeling the same thing, although from a different perspective. So the challenge is the education system that we have today isn't necessarily built for the economy that we have today and that we'll have in the future. And I think that applies across all industries. So the challenge we have is that I think as businesses, we have to think differently about our role. Historically, in the US, we're thought of as advisors to the education system. They come to us and say, what are the competencies that your employees need to be successful? And we share with them what those are. And then we go back to work, and our expectation is they're going to deliver that product. And then we're always disappointed, and we become the world's worst critic. And my belief, and I believe our perspective in Colorado, is that has to change. That, in fact, the schools can't teach everyone. So our solution is that business has to play a meaningful role in the education process, starting in the K-12 system, but extending into the four-year college system as well. Our approach is to use youth apprenticeship, starting when kids are in high school, in the 15 and 16, to begin that process.
Great, and I want to come back to the issue of apprenticeships a little later in our conversation, because I think it's something that's really critical, and a lot of people are thinking about that. But John, I want to ask you the same question, because I know that Pearson has been thinking a lot about this and career readiness as you think about the direction of your company, the new business strategy for your company. So what are you hearing as you talk to private sector leaders, and also what are you thinking about as a private sector leader that has to build and develop talent yourself?
Yeah, so I think our company is probably typical of any large global company in any sector that is seeing significant disruption through technology and significant change through globalization of one form or another. We see things like our sales teams, rather than going out and selling relatively standalone products, now need to do much more consultative selling with their customers in terms of how they think about solutions and services. Our product development teams, rather than working in small silos, are having to work in a much more sort of matrixed way and work and manage a lot more range of relationships. And just the sheer geographical spread of the business means that quite often people are working remotely, or they're having to work by sort of conference call and the like. So just sort of unpack that and think about the sort of skills that requires of somebody. You want someone who obviously has good core knowledge. So they are literate, they're numerate, they've got good digital skills. There's a specialism that they have, whether that's in math or science or business or accounting or whatever it might be. But you also want someone who's a good team player, who's collaborative, who can work and engage and be empathetic to others. And you need someone who's got sort of grit, resilience, determination. Although, like all things in life, there's a danger that, we never talked about grit at all 3 years ago. Now there's a danger that we talk about nothing but grit. Yes, we want people who are gritty, And if you've followed the challenges Pearson have faced over the last year or so, grit has certainly been something we've needed in plentiful supply. But we also want pioneers, we want inventors, we want people who are innovative, we want people who are creative. Now, no one person's going to have all those things, but if you unpack that, there's sort of the core knowledge that you want everybody to have. There's almost like the intrapersonal, the things about us as an individual, and then there's the interpersonal of how we sort of engage. And actually, you can map those out, and you can teach the interpersonal and the intrapersonal, just as you can teach the core knowledge. And if I may risk making a unfashionable view, or a politically courageous view maybe, and we can call it higher standards, we can call it college and career readiness, let's call it anything but Common Core. But let's acknowledge why all those governors got together a few years ago to try and create a more advanced curriculum was precisely because they knew that the young people of this country, if they were to be competitive, if they were to be successful, didn't need rote-based learning. They needed core knowledge, critical skills, problem-solving skills, and the like. Right. So that's how I think it all fits together.
And some of the skills you talked about are the very skills that when we map America against the rest of the world, we find that we at best have challenges, or we're not where we need to be competitive. And at the same time, we talk about the soft skills, and I always do this when I say that, because they are not soft skills. They're actually very complicated, important skills in terms of working together, communication, all of those skills. We're struggling to identify the best place and the best way to teach those skills. And Gerald, I'm wondering, given the work that you do at Europe, and Europe does work across the country, both through community colleges as well as standalone, as well as sitting inside in some employers, to provide both classroom-based training as well as internships for young people. And in many cases, young people that much of the country might say, these people are not necessarily going to be prepared for the workforce. So by way of background, those are the young people that you're working with, and at the same time, working with a lot of private sector employers, large private sector employers. And I'm wondering, given that experience, where do you see the private sector actually undermining itself? Given the kinds of skills that John and Noel talked about are necessary, and the work that you do every day, how is the private sector making its job more difficult for itself in finding the skills and finding the workforce that it needs?
Great. First of all, thanks. Melody, it's always a pleasure to be here with you, and Noel and John as well. I think business has a quality and a quantity problem. I think any projection out in terms of, are we going to have enough college graduates, are we going to have enough STEM graduates, the answer is no. So there is a real quantity problem fundamentally at the core, which is projected to be a 10 million person shortage in skilled labor over the next 10 or so years. But I think that also have a quality problem, right? I don't think many institutions of higher education are thinking about what we call ABCs, attitudinal, behavioral, and communication skills, which at the entry level for an employer, I think they care a lot more about the ABCs rather than do you have technical knowledge. They'll train. A good employer will train you if you come with the right attitude and behavior. But then you take that and say, well, but then what's the challenge? The challenge is we have a market failure, right? We have a huge supply of talent. Just in the one population we serve, 6 million young people between the ages of 16 and 24 who are out of the economic mainstream, and then millions of open jobs in the country. And one of the things business, I think, is doing is the lens through which they look to find talent is relatively, not in entirety, but relatively myopic. It could be much broader in terms of finding talent. I'll give you one example of that. If you're a business, and I ask anyone to check your job descriptions in your company, and you say 4-year degree required, not preferred, not typical, but if you say 4-year degree required, you've just excluded 87% of Latinos and 82% of African Americans in the United States of America. So that may or may not, I doubt many businesses say that's a conscious attempt to narrow the aperture of my lens, but the reality is the view that folks go to college for 4 years and then start work is a relatively antiquated view as to how labor is moving through systems in this country. And so I think business can really start, as Noel, you talked about, thinking much more broadly about multiple pathways into the workforce, one of which is a 4-year college, one is a 2-year college, one is apprenticeships, alternative programs, whether they're catering to veterans or opportunity youth or folks who have various levels of ability levels. And so I think business has gotten by for a long time on a relatively traditional path. It is now, I believe, threatening their own competitiveness unless they start to widen the aperture and think much more broadly about who's talented in this country and where does talent reside in this country.
And building on that, who is talented and where does talent reside? And you talked about the 6 million young people, and when we use the terminology opportunity youth, we are talking about 16 to 24-year-olds who have been outside of the economic mainstream. They are not connected to education institutions or to the workforce. And Gerald, as you have this conversation with business leaders around the country and others, the society writ large, how do you convince people that that group of young people can be prepared for the workforce, that it is realistic to expect that someone who may have dropped out of school or may have finished high school but not gone on and gotten any other kind of certification or has a GED can be prepared to go into the kinds of jobs that are out there, and that we can do that at scale, that we can actually do that not just 100 or 200 young people at a time, but hundreds of thousands or millions of young people at a time?
Certainly when I started, it was hard, 16 years ago, to get an employer to say, we believe that young person's talented, especially if they didn't come through a traditional channel. 15,000 young people later, with, whether it's American Express or Bank of America or Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, what I've noticed is it's leaders in business, and this is fascinating, leaders in business who are willing to actually enable their companies to take a risk, or what is perceived as a risk, to try something differently. So when Jamie Dimon said, we believe this, let's go do more of it, or Ken Chenault or Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn, what it struck me is the role of leadership to actually enable folks to look at different populations of talent plays an initial trial, and then it's up to us to prove that those young people are going to be successful, and then companies now committing hundreds, if not thousands of jobs to our population because they've now proven they can learn Java or QA testing or fund accounting for large companies. So now the referenceability has taken it beyond will this work or won't it work, but it still does rely on leadership because no one gets paid a bonus in the middle management of a company today to hire a low-income young adult from Harlem or the south side of Chicago or South Dallas. So leadership matters, especially looking at very diverse populations across race, ethnicity, socioeconomic, non-traditional, quote-unquote, pathways. It does come down to CEO leadership, and I think that echo chamber that can create is vast to allow a company to think slightly differently about where they draw on talent.
No.
So boot camp for me in this space began when my wife and I adopted 42 kids through the I Have a Dream Foundation probably 20-some years ago. And we adopted them from a neighborhood that had a 90% dropout rate. It was a housing project. And if you're not familiar with the program, essentially we stay with those kids till they graduate from high school. If they do, they get a college scholarship. But the real magic of that process is that these kids, when I walked on to the projects the first time, they had the same sparkle that our kids have. They had all the future ahead of them. That spark hadn't been extinguished. Our job was to keep the spark alive and to keep them focused on their careers, on their schooling, so that they would have a future. So 10 years later, we graduated 90% of those kids. Turned that percentage totally upside down. Some moved into college, some moved into the military. One of those young people was very close to our family, went into the military, came into Intertech, my company, ended up running a division of over $10 million. The kid now works for a company that we sold that division to, makes well over 6 figures. And the point of this is, what I saw over that 10 years is that you can change outcomes. It's about staying connected with kids, and then making sure that those pathways stay available to them and that they're aware of what they are. Because it's by no accident that Oscar chose manufacturing. It's because I brought him to work with me. So I think what I've been looking for from that experience is how do you take what you do for 42 kids and do it for a city, a state, or a country? And what I saw when I visited Switzerland a year ago this week is a country that does that. Because in a country that graduates 28% of their population with a 4-year degree or beyond, as we do, we don't have a system for the 70% that don't go and get a 4-year degree. But we tell everybody they need one. We put on our job descriptions that they have to have a college degree. And we're missing an incredible amount of talent. In Switzerland, though, 70% go through an apprenticeship system beginning when they are in high school. And they might end up being the president of UBS, who was an apprentice, or their secretary of education, who went into a banking apprenticeship and ended up being their head of education. My point is, in that system, for all jobs, all careers, there's an apprenticeship. And if you then take that apprenticeship and get a 4-year degree, your market value goes up 20 to 30%. Their unemployment rate in that country for youth is 2.4%. For our kids, if you're a minority in some of our cities, it's as high as 30% today. So I don't think actually what they're doing is magic. But when you look at it from the US perspective, it kind of seems like, are you nuts? But I believe, as we were able to do with 42 kids, that you can do that for a city, a state, and even a country. And I think for my industry, manufacturing, if we don't begin to address different strategies that give kids that experience early on and tap their talents, because those opportunity youth, which those are my 42 kids, and they had incredible talent. They just didn't realize it.
And grit.
Yeah.
Grit. And you
And
were talking about, yeah.
worse, the society was telling them, if you don't get your degree, you're a failure. We've got to stop telling that to our kids.
And I want to come back and hold a chunk of time to talk more about the how, like the Swiss model. Often people talk about the German model, but the Swiss model and others. But before doing that, I just want to talk about one other group of workers, because we often talk about young people. But I also want to talk about that worker that was somewhere in the middle of their career, and the Great Recession hit. The company left the town. They had a job that allowed them to pay the mortgage, live a decent middle-class lifestyle, and all of a sudden the bottom fell out. And they're working a couple of low-wage jobs to try and hold things together. And what do we also have to do when we're thinking about that worker? How are their skills and experiences valued, or are they valued in the workplace, given the rapid change in the workplace? And what can we do to ensure that they're getting the kind of training that they need to go back in and to build off the skills they already had? And John, I don't know if that's something that you all are also thinking about.
I think that's a phenomenon that you're seeing throughout the system. I was up in Manchester, Southern New Hampshire a few weeks ago. Southern New Hampshire University, I think one of the widely regarded as one of the more innovative and pioneering universities in the country. A sort of commencement hall of 900 graduates, and these already had their undergraduate degrees. They were actually taking a graduate degree. It was the first time physically they'd been on campus. It was the first time they'd actually met their tutors. They'd done all their studying online, and they were mid-career, largely in employment, but recognizing that that graduate program was going to get them a promotion, a salary increase. It's what they needed to do to further their career. But from the airport, I was picked up by a taxi driver who was sort of exactly the person you've just described. So he'd had a very successful career working in, essentially doing fitting out of new offices for sort of technology infrastructure. And a combination of the Great Recession and the move to cloud-based software had sort of pulled the rug from under him. He was working as a taxi driver. He wanted to go and work for FEMA, and he'd had all sorts of conversations with him, and FEMA had said, you can't do it unless you've got a degree. So he'd done his community college degree, and now he was working 2 jobs, studying online. He actually found studying online incredibly difficult because He hadn't had a conventional education, unlike the graduate student. So for him, he missed the personal sort of contact. So I think for those people, so this is where we have to meet people where they are and meet their needs. And I think sort of, purely online education works very, very well, primarily for people who are already quite well advanced in their careers and confident in their own ability, that they know how to learn. I think for this group of people that you're talking about, and it's a huge economic issue, it's a huge social issue, because you can see it in the numbers. These people saw their incomes sort of plateau from 79 through to 2000, and then they've done that since. And that's, I think, where a lot of the pent-up anger and frustration in the nation comes from. So I think there's more we can do. I don't have an easy answer, but I would left that taxi feeling pretty uneasily that we're not actually doing a very good job of meeting the needs of people like that at the moment.
Gerald and
Mel, the governor of Massachusetts, Baker, had appointed me to a task force to look at unemployed, specifically longer-term unemployed. So we went around the state of Massachusetts, listened to testimony from many folks who had been unemployed for a period of time, and what clearly 100% was required. You first have to build someone's self-confidence and self-worth before you're going to help them train to get a job. And it was incredibly palpable how someone's self-worth was destroyed when they went from employed to unemployed, and not just 3 months, but it was kind of after 6 months to a year. You were not dealing with a training issue. You're actually dealing with a confidence issue. So the best programs in the country helping long-term unemployed get back to work are first starting with confidence, and then also giving an employer a small incentive that will pay the wages for the first 6 weeks to help a person get back in, so that the employer needs some incentive typically as well to help that person come back in. And just kind of I'm always keen on audience participation. Just for John mentioned about degrees, and you as well, Noel, talked about a degree. Just do a quick test here. Raise your hand in the audience if you have a 4-year degree. Keep it up if you got it between the ages of 18 and 22. Mr. Fallon, about how many percent of hands are up? You can put your hands down.
The vast majority.
90, 95% of the hands are up. If you ask those same 2 questions of any 100 adults in the United States of America today, those exact 2 questions, how many hands would be up? What do you think? 20%? 30%?
30.
Less than that.
8% of the hands in the United States of America would still be up after you ask those same 2 questions. Yet we perpetuate the system that says you go to college for 4 years, you get a degree, only costs gone up higher than healthcare in this country or higher ed. It's an interesting concept. Yet only 8 out of 100 adults did what 98% in this room have done. And so we think about policy often in our own self-image. What have we consumed? What were our paths, which we're a pretty homogeneous group? So it's kind of a really rethinking, what does America need, consistent with the broad swathe of the way in which people are getting skilled and educated post-high school, as opposed to do it the way we consumed it, many of the folks, myself included, who were privileged in many ways to get that in a linear path of education and then labor.
Oh, please.
I think what you said is very powerful, because everybody in this room are the ones that most likely have been involved in those discussions of how to build that system, and we do it with all the best intentions, but we do it from our perspective. And it is so important that we expand our view of the world and what really works for the whole country and not just a specific group that might be our kids. To your question, in Colorado, we are partnering with the Markle Foundation out of New York and LinkedIn in the creation of a web tool called Skillful. And Colorado is the first statewide launch of Skillful. And what it's intended to do is to give the incumbent worker, somebody that may be that cab driver that lost his job, maybe is losing some confidence, can click in there and find kind of what his interests are, his or her interest, and then find what type of careers might exist within those interests, drill down a little bit further and define what kind of competencies are required to be successful, and then be able to really get an understanding of, do I have those skills? And if not, it navigates them to the type of education within our community college system and four-year college system within Colorado so they can navigate to the training or certifications that they need. And then, if they want, they can click further and actually get a live person to help counsel them through that process. And the point, obviously, of that website is to connect those people with the jobs that exist, because many times they're hidden. The second part of the Skillful platform is to get businesses to think differently, as you pointed out earlier. Stop saying you have to have a college degree or don't apply. I remember a story that our lieutenant governor shared, that when he became the LG for the state of Colorado, he wanted to bring his executive assistant with her. But the hiring guidelines for the state required them to have a four-year degree. So he said, I couldn't bring the best assistant I had to this new position. I hired somebody through the system with a degree, frankly, wasn't anywhere near as capable as the person I used. That's a tragedy when you do that. And I think with Opportunity Youth, there's these diamonds in the rough, and they're not even some of them in the rough, they're just diamonds. But we are filtering them out. So Skillful is training businesses to think differently about how they develop their job descriptions to make sure that they're competency-based, and then have a portal that they can use to network. And let's say they say, you know what, I'm kind of interested in Coors Brewing, Colorado company. They can see within LinkedIn who are the people that they might know that work there, or the people they might reach out to and say, I'm interested in working at Coors. So it's really a robust tool. It's just been launched about 60, 90 days ago, so we're going through the development of it. But it's one way that we're looking to approach this as a state, and we're building it off of the work that's already happening within the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. So we're using our existing infrastructure to support it.
Yeah.
So I should say, I agree with what my fellow panelists are saying, in the sense of, yes, we should challenge employers to be more flexible and less rigid about the demand for a four-year degree. I agree that we should be focusing much more on middle skills, that we should be thinking about different approaches. I know we're not saying this, but let's not also give up on improving college graduation rates amongst African Americans and Hispanics as well, because there's a simple number to remember: 84%. The lifetime earnings in this country of somebody with a college degree compared with somebody who's only got a high school diploma is 84%. A two-income household where both members of the household are college graduates earn on average $55,000 a year more than a two-income household where people have both got a high school graduation. We are seeing, I think, something this country should celebrate, the number of non-conventional students, for want of phrase, but actually are becoming the convention, the over 24s who are getting college and university degrees. You mentioned the work of the Markle Foundation. They were the genesis of a project whereby Starbucks are giving many of their employees the chance to complete college degrees and the like. So I think let's get employers to be more flexible, let's focus on middle skills, let's think about apprenticeship, but let's not give up on improving college graduation rates as well, I think is the point.
Do you think, Joan, I mean, I agree with that. If you look out 20 years, do you think the words you chose, a degree, because a degree is only a proxy or something else, and it's a poor proxy, as some folks would say who've hired college graduates and said, okay, you can't write, you're a college graduate. How many in the room have found that? So do you think that language will adapt and take 20-year view in terms of what it is that enables that family to do well? And will it still be a proxy of a degree, or will we actually develop much greater assessment and/or ability to look through that proxy to the actual competency and skill that an employer needs?
I think it's a very good question. I mean, we do, back to Southern New Hampshire, we've been doing a lot of work with them and others to think about this whole idea of competency-based education. So you qualify somebody on the basis of competency demonstrated, not time served. And if that person comes to you with who's shown extensive leadership capability from their time in the military, or they've demonstrated working for an NGO or a not-for-profit, that you accredit and value that time. I think we're seeing a big growth in sort of badging and alternative credentialing and the like. So yes, I think that plays a part of it. I think also the development of technology means the opportunity for much more blended learning. There's no reason for somebody to go away from home and be there for 4 years and study full time. A lot of students anyway are working several jobs while they're in college. Why not formalize and recognize that much more? I think we can reduce the cost of higher education. We've certainly got to improve completion rates. Well, barely 6 in 10 people who start a 4-year degree have actually graduated 6 years later. So I agree with all that. My one or two hesitations would be, certainly as someone who works with universities every day, you have to work with them where you find them. And for every pioneer like Michael Crow at Arizona State University, or the folks up at University of Southern New Hampshire, Paula Blanc up at Southern New Hampshire, there are others who wish to move at a rather more sedate pace. So I think that's one qualification. And secondly, I just worry that if we're too quick to write off the universal currency of a degree, the people we might suffer most were the people who most need the help and benefit of getting from it. So I think that's that's the thing we've got to watch. I don't know where you do. Yeah.
Totally.
I think we have to hold a couple of things at the same time, and different individuals want and need different kinds of experiences and post-secondary experiences. So ensuring that we provide those experiences in the best possible way, one, and I want to ask you all about the range of institutions that are doing training and education from 4-year to 2-year to certifications to apprenticeships, union-based, career and technical education that starts in high schools, where they're doing it well and where they are falling short. So we need to think about that. And at the same time, I think what you're also saying, Gerald, is as people take advantage of those different kinds of experiences, making sure that they are all valued and the skills and competencies and education that people have when they come out are equally valued. Because I know from working with clients and others, people will wax eloquent and say, these are great opportunities. They're great training opportunities. But our clients really want someone with a 4-year degree. So how do we deal with that bias at the same time that we're providing a full range of opportunities that are really valued for people to take advantage of them as they want to and need to? Noel, I know you wanted to say something, but I do want to ask you all, who's doing this well, and how and where are people falling short? Where do we see the kind of improvement that we need to make sure that people are getting an excellent experience through these different kinds of training and education programs?
Well, I'll jump to that question. In our pilot in Colorado is with the Denver Public Schools. It's a district of 90,000 students. We have in our pilot 6,000 students within the CTE, Career and Technical Ed program. Those kids, when we have done back studies on them, are graduating at a 30% higher rate than their peers outside of CTE. And CTE is not, it's really engineering, it's finance, it's what you'd want it to be. And it's regardless of income, ethnicity, they just graduate at 30% higher levels. Mm-hmm. So I think they're an example of a district that is on the cutting edge in trying to make the work more practical. And when I say that, schools are designed to teach theory. They're not as easily able to teach the practice. And that's where the intersection comes. And I think it applies to the college education as well. Because how many times have you heard about the college kid that graduates and then either A, can't find a job, or does find a job, and the employer says, wow, I brought them in, I had to retrain them. Yeah. Well, that's because there's a clear disconnect between what happens in the classrooms, whether they be K-12 or in higher ed, and what's actually happening in business and industry. We need to bring that together, and I think those examples of organizations that do get much better results. Certainly, I don't think anything should replace one of the best college education systems that we have in this country. And in fact, we want to I would agree. You want more kids in, but the reality is we can't go from 28% to 50% and afford it. So we have to have paths that, for those that can get that opportunity, but they get it with the theory and the practice so that they are much more productive in the workplace when they start.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of data points that demonstrates this sort of sense that education and business are sort of ships that pass in the night. I think it's 11% of business leaders think that college graduates are career ready. And 94% of chief academic officers at American universities believe they do a good job of ensuring their graduates are career ready. 90% of students will say that the primary reason they're going to university is to enhance their career and employment prospects, but less than 25% of them actually embark on career-enhancing activities alongside their studies, whether that's thinking about how they're going to develop their profile on LinkedIn or doing outreach to employers or thinking about how I build my sort of CV. So I think this issue is there as a disconnect. In terms of who's doing it well, I think the challenge for many years was you were trying to do it in the dark without data, and I think the point that you were making, the work that LinkedIn and Burning Glass and others are doing, that means we've now got much better information, and that information can guide employers, it can bind community colleges and policymakers and students themselves. For example, if a four-year degree isn't for you, but you are sort of ambitious and you want to be able to progress in your career and add great value to a company and have a good chance of enhancing your earning, then the sorts of careers and occupations you should be looking at in America today would be in areas like healthcare, they'd be in areas like in insurance, they'd be in areas like get yourself a job working on a technology help desk in a company, because they will, if you show promise, train you then to do Java, and you'll be able to progress, and all the data's there. 24% of all jobs posted on places like LinkedIn are actually sort of technical sales roles. Again, these are good jobs because you have the chance to progress. But one, how many of the sort of people you're talking about, Gerald, actually would know any of that unless somebody gives them help? And secondly, what all those jobs will require is high school math. And the biggest single problem that I think many people have is, essentially they give up on math about 8th grade. And so to your point, they don't need a college degree. They don't even need a certificate really, but they do need to be able to have a degree of numeracy. And if we come back to, there's some really interesting projects, for example, down at the University of Texas at Austin, to really think about how you can do that at scale. I think that's...
And Gerald, you respond, and then I'm going to open this up for questions, so please start thinking about the questions you may have for the panel.
I think one thing we're hearing pretty consistently amongst this group is talent is distributed evenly in this country, yet opportunity is not. And I think that's ubiquitous concept. I think one of the best things we could do as a society is stop talking about college, because when we say the word college, we all have a conception of what that means, and adopt something just called post-secondary education. And it's going to take different forms and formats, as opposed to when we say college, a lot of people assume it means X. It's what you need. Everyone needs education after high school. And there's a lot of different forms that can take, but to adopt that language of post-secondary versus college, I think would be helpful, because there are going to be multiple paths that we need to value. I think the skills required to work in a knowledge-based economy and the skills required to learn in post-secondary education are convergent lines rather than divergent lines. So what you're teaching, it's why CTE schools in Massachusetts, our best performing high school is a CTE school in Worcester, and the students pass their SATs at higher rates than many others, because it's a relevant education that they're really enjoying and they're getting a lot out of, and that it's relevant to them. So CTE, or vocational career ready, is not just for those kids, right? Every human being should walk out of high school in America today knowing how to work. In addition, they need to be college ready. Yet the word career ready has no standards, no assessments, And so we merrily say, oh, our students are career ready when they come out of high school, yet find me the assessments and standards resident within state systems.
We're working
to
on it.
drive that, and yeah, and you get it. Look, it is folks like Pearson.
No, but there is a body of work. It's taken some years, but it will come through.
And it's needed, absolutely.
Great. Hands are flying up. Wonderful. And we've got a person with the mic. Why don't we start right here in the front with the blue short sleeve shirt?
Hello.
And why don't you give us your name?
Oh, my name's Amit. I'm 18 years old, and I've learned more in the last 48 hours than I have in 18 years of schooling.
It's an advertising for Aspen Ideas.
So all three of you have worked with kids in different ways, minority communities as well as very wealthy communities. And you've seen the way they work and had a lot of success. A lot of these ideas about empowering them with skills, soft or hard, are great. But at the end of the day, these kids have to take initiative to do something with it and to believe in themselves because of the color of their skin, their race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality. How have you seen the best way to inspire kids when they do have these resources to actually succeed in the workforce?
I mean, I'll tell you, I was talking about this at a session a bit earlier that, you know, just in the last few months, I've been in sort of high schools to community colleges from, I guess, sort of Florida to Texas, from Minnesota to Massachusetts, where incredible progress been made in doing just what you've described. And all very different, but all had three things in common. Strong leadership, really strong leadership of the school or college, with high-performing teachers who really worked together as a team and helped and supported and critiqued each other's lessons and really worked. Secondly, and I think this goes back to the point I'm sure Gerald would make, is a personal plan for every single student and a high expectation that every single student can succeed on their own terms in their own way, but that is relevant, doesn't presuppose is relevant to the individual and the ideas and sort of aspirations. And then third, increasingly, technology that's enabling you to then do more to do that sort of personalized, to scale, to share, and to sort of engage and do it more at scale. I think those are the three things that I would say really stand out. And actually, if you look at the research from around the world, if you looked at sort of from Shanghai to Finland to Hong Kong to Singapore to actually high-performing high schools in Massachusetts, which if it was a country would be one of the top-performing, 10 top-performing countries in the world in its own right, those are the three things I think I see most common.
Great.
I don't know what this is yet.
A question right here, gentleman with a black jacket on. This is where I do my fashion show. Please give us your name.
I'm Josephat Loy, a student from the African Leadership Academy in South Africa and a Bezos Scholar 2016. My question is, where is the future of the young growing generation, considering that the current educational models are becoming increasingly irrelevant and suggesting that there's a mismatch between the perceived role of education and the demands of a modern worker? Thank you.
Anyone?
I missed part of what he
Yeah,
said.
you said the perceived role, where, just give us the very beginning of your question.
My question, I'm sorry, where's the future of the young growing generation, considering that the current educational models are increasingly becoming irrelevant, and they're suggesting that there's a mismatch between the perceived role of education and the demands of a modern worker?
So I think that are you asking about innovation within the system? Yeah. I think my perception is the best innovation will come when the education process, both within the workplace and in the classrooms, wherever that classroom is, become connected directly. Because that isn't happening. We talk about it as if it is, but it isn't. And when you bring those two together, innovation will come through understanding of the demands in the workplace and the fast-paced nature of it. Face it, the nature of education and sometimes the bureaucracy of how it operates is it moves very slow. Whereas in business and industry, our markets are moving very fast. So our technologies are changing. And so if we aren't communicating all the time, then the innovation won't take place because they're always looking in the rearview mirror as opposed to looking forward together.
We have a question, a woman right in the middle, sitting next to the, yes, perfect.
Thank you. My name is Madeline Levine. Sort of two-part question. What is talent, first of all? And second of all, I'm in education and psychology. The education system has always served the needs of the economy. So it was a brief education system so you could get back to the farm. It was a rote education system so you could get on an assembly line. It seems to me there's a bifurcation at this point between the needs of business and the education system we still have in place. What have been the barriers to having business and education collaborate in a more useful way?
I mean,
Thank you.
I think they don't speak the same language often. And if you approach an academic institution, the way in which they talk about what is their role and who they're preparing young people for, or talent or skills for. So I think, as Noel and John said as well, unless business today is the largest trainer in America. So more money is spent by businesses on training than any other institution combined. So business has to get in the business of education in a, as Noel said, in a fundamentally different way, in a partnership. It's not kind of the baton handing to the next runner down the track. This is all on the same team, and I think successful businesses are putting their time and energy into really building those linkages with institutions in fundamentally different ways. And I would imagine that's going to have to continue to progress and be nimble, whilst academic institutions are often by governance set up to be slow-moving to withstand changes in leadership. Decision-making is diverse, specifically to withstand the change in a president or a leader. So it's not that they're bad institutions, they were designed differently. So I would think the nimbleness in response to the market, if I'm in academia, has to be a driving force and relates to the question on innovation of how to get better at sensing and responding to the changing demand for skills, which, if you look at what % of jobs in this country will be disrupted by technology. I was on a panel with these MIT PhDs. I was clearly bringing the average IQ down on the panel. And I asked each one of them, I said, give me the lowest and highest number of jobs in this country, % of jobs in America, that'll be fundamentally disrupted by technology in the next couple decades. The lowest estimate I could get was 10% and the highest was 40. So if you think about that, there's 120 million workers, 12 to 50 million jobs might be disrupted by technology. So what skills are going to be in demand tomorrow, which will actually be more complex communications, social emotional skills, things that are actually pretty hard to automate. How do I, as academia, start to think about what is going to happen when technology continues to eat away at jobs? Number one job in 29 states of America, what do you think it is? Driver. Number one job in 29 of our states. How likely is it in 20 years that we're not going to need drivers to the same extent?
Extremely high.
Academia is going to have to respond in ways that I don't think many of us, and I certainly have trouble projecting what a 2 decades out going to look like for our competitiveness as a country.
I'm just going to make a point in defense of the current education system, because bifurcation, yes, middle skills, pathways to universities, but as a nation, we must never, ever lose sight of the fact that every citizen needs sort of problem-solving, critical thinking skills, because they're going to be fundamental to everybody being successful. And the difference between someone who can solve abstract math problems, do sums essentially, and someone who can use mathematical language to solve a real-world problem, that's a difference of 40% in lifetime earnings, and that's the difference between No Child Left Behind as was, and Common Core, or whatever we now call it now. So in that sense, the education system has tried, maybe more slowly, maybe more conservatively than we'd like, to anticipate what every American citizen is going to need to be successful in the future world.
Gentleman right here in the jacket, the Orange pen. It's on.
Jason Primo, I'm an Aspen Fellow in. It's not working. There we go.
There we go.
Live. Jason Primo, I'm an Aspen Fellow in South Carolina, and also aerospace manufacturer. So short term, there's a lot of merit. Definitely agree. When you're running a for-profit business and you can't find your workforce, unlike the government, we get really creative, really fast to solve these problems. And you heard some great examples here from Intertech about real solutions, not from government. This is from private industry. They work, and they work quickly to put people to work. We need to do more of that. Long term, though, I'm going to challenge you that you got it all wrong. If you look at the pace of innovation, it is, I claim that it's going to change 100% of the jobs at the lower skilled workforce. 8 years ago, it cost me 150 grand, 200 grand to put in industrial robotics to do automation. Now it's 20 grand, and it can work beside people with no cage, interact with people. So if we keep funneling everybody towards middle to low skilled jobs, they're not going to have any jobs. We actually need 5 times more people going to 4-year colleges, because the only thing that we can do in the future is innovate. We have a shortage of engineers and scientists in this country. Everything else is going to get automated. The one thing you can't automate is innovation, and calculus is hard, and you need to have a lot of training, and you don't want the person designing the next jet engine to get a 90-day certificate. So we need a lot more innovation pipeline. But when you have high schools that don't meet the needs, they're not guiding kids into that path. We have a systemic problem. Definitely there are bridge programs from technical colleges. I'm on the board of a technical college. 30,000 kids go through it, and a lot of high-skilled jobs. And it's great to start there and to have a bridge to advance your career. But every semester they shut down classes because they can't fill the seats, because high schools are not responding to the needs of industry.
So I'd like to push back on you a little bit. The most innovative country, I think now for the second year in a row, was not the United States. It was Switzerland. And it isn't because I can share with you is the statistic, but let me carry through with the thought. The difference between what you're saying, I don't believe necessarily it can and should be, when appropriate, be through that college classroom. But when I was at a training center with a 15-year-old in Switzerland 3 months ago, and he said to me, when I was in my math class and they talked to me about a thousandth of an inch, it meant nothing. Today, when I'm building this component, if I'm off a thousandth of an inch, it won't work. So the point is, the missing link isn't the theory. It's blending the theory and the practice.
Well, that's what I said. High schools aren't responding. They're not teaching applied.
Well, but see, here's what I would tell you. We tell our high schools to be everything to everybody, and I don't believe it's possible. And I think the reason a small country like Switzerland is high in the innovation index is because they have a system of education that encourages innovation, that brings together that theory and practice, but it isn't in the classroom. It happens within industry. Their system, 40% of all employers in Switzerland participate. 70% of all students participate in the apprenticeship system. So they are creating an innovative economy because of the way they train their people, and they're not depending on the classroom to be everything to everybody, but they are using the relevancy of the apprenticeship to teach the students why that math you're needing is so important. Because if we're going to build the next technology to take us into the galaxy, it's going to come from youth. And the second thing I'd share with you is those companies, and this is based on research again from Switzerland through ETH, is that when you bring young people into your business through an apprenticeship type model, they bring innovation into your company because they have a different perspective on the world. They're young, they're technologically adept today because everything comes through their iPad or their phone. And so we, I think in industry, have to stop pointing our finger at education and say, this is your problem, fix it. What I'm suggesting is in business, we have to stop being consumers of the education process, but producers as well. We have to stop approaching this from our foundations within our businesses and start approaching it through our human resources department. because we view this work with Opportunity Youth or these training pipeline as our community service. It's not. The research will show that those companies that do apprenticeships in those countries that do this actually are more profitable than their cohorts that do not. So in the United States, one of our challenges is making the case that don't do this because you're going to build a better community or you're going to help this kid. Do it because you're going to be more profitable. Businesses in this country will not adapt this concept unless we realize we're going to be more profitable. And what I see in dealing with some large companies around the country, on a workforce council I sit on in New York, or that I sat on in New York, is that their training systems don't work anymore, and they know it. They're looking for a different system that is more efficient. I believe those answers are out there. I'm not saying that the Swiss system is the only one to look at, but I do think we have to think differently, and it's not just the school's responsibility.
And with that, I am getting the hook, and I think a provocative set of ideas and questions to think about. Please thank the panel.